I'm Raymond Suttner. I've been attached to Creamer Media's polity since 2010, and in that period we've had various experiments. What I'm doing now was previously done with interviews. We're now trying to have a podcast and evaluating how it works and what should be added or subtracted. The two articles to which this podcast refers relate in the first place to Mandela's personality traits and how these impacted on his political actions, that is, his supposed stubbornness, and in particular, and the second one relates to imagery and identities. How important were these for Mandela? Now, when I came to this, originally I was a Marxist and a communist. And one of the things that you learned when you became a communist, and to some extent a Marxist, was to not believe in the great man theory of history. And that is the idea that everything is explained by the greatness of Mandela or anyone else. But I would not then have been equipped to do the type of podcasts and articles that I'm writing now, because central to this is the distinct personality of Mandela. He's not just a former president of the ANC who's passed away, but he's a person with a particular unique personality. And this personality has a lot of significance for his political activities, the way in which people evaluate him, the way in which they relate to him, the way in which they opposed or agreed with him. So I feel that I've grown, and I've grown without the assistance of Marxism. What I've particularly benefited from has been feminism. Because feminism is very concerned with the relationship between the personal and the political, mainly with women, but also with men like Mandela. Now, when I talk about Mandela's personality, I'm talking about something that changed throughout his life. When he was a young boy, he was taken to the guardianship of the regent of Tembuland, Umkhonto, and he believed then that his life destiny was already defined by his birth. He didn't have aspirations to become a Springbok rugby player or something like that. Mandela's personality changed, but some of what he had been before remained with him to the end of his life. From early on, Mandela was very proud of being a Tembu, part of the Upper Tembu people, and he saw this as defining the whole course of his future life when he would become a counselor to the future king, Sabata Dalindyebo. And wherever he went, even if he didn't really belong there, was behind his schoolwork, he consoled himself by the destiny that he had and believed that that was what was marked out for him. From very early on, Mandela grew up in an environment where, although the Tembu were conquered people, the boys and men were initiated into a warrior masculinity. Boys played separately from girls to a large extent, and the boys' games were mainly war games, and rough, tough masculinities were what was required to be a man. And in initiation, once your foreskin was cut, circumcision, you were not supposed to cry out pain, but to say, I am a man. Mandela believes that he failed in this because the pain was so great, he was slow to shout, I am a man. And I think that is the way he was writing in his 70s was a signal to young boys that they don't have to be brave above everything else. It is inhuman to feel pain and not pretend it hasn't happened. From very early on, Mandela continued this toughness. For example, he got interested in stick fighting, later to be followed by boxing, and boxing became very important in Mandela's identity. A lot of people saw that he boxed and they translated this into a political identity. There's a case where Comrade Diale is a waiter in a restaurant and the people, the patrons say to him, what does the newspaper say? Because he's reading the Rand Daily Mail. And he says, they say that Mandela is appearing in court. And they respond, he'll beat up the Boers. So Mandela's boxing was translated into an aggressive, violent masculinity some years before the formation of MK and the transition from peaceful activities to armed activities and other violent activities. Mandela's personality changed, but also remained the same because he was also a stubborn person, as the title of the article says. But we've got to understand that the word stubborn does not mean simply unwillingness to change or pig-headedness or mulishness. Stubbornness can mean that you are not prepared to compromise basic values of your organization, in this case, the liberation struggle for freedom in South Africa. So Mandela was not prepared to compromise that. That was his stubbornness. It continued with him when he went to prison, when he was waiting. He had to, when you go to prison, you've got to be patient. You're not getting out early because political prisoners got no remission whatsoever. When we were interviewed ever, it was not about release. We were very careful to make no promises, no undertakings that we'd be good boys or anything like that. And sometimes we destroyed our own chances, but I don't think we had any chances. Mandela says that he matured in prison. One of the ways he matured is he listened to everyone. He waited and he got to know lots of people from other organizations. He heard about their problems, helped them with their legal problems. Because Mandela, you'll recall, was a trained attorney in a company with Oliver Tambo. And in prison, he would talk to all these people. He would be patient. He would play chess. He'd be so slow to make a move that he'd break the spirit of his opponents. And they would go mad and throw away the game. Whereas Mandela took sometimes 2 days to make a move. Now, when Mandela was in prison, an opportunity arose to open up talks with the other side. Mandela initiated talks with the apartheid regime, and what I had been taught in the struggle is, as a leader, you don't simply go and do things. You put it to the organization. You wait for their okay, then you may do it. And what Mandela did is he initiated talks in secret. He said he did it in secret because he wanted to present them with a fait accompli. It means an act that's already done, so they couldn't stop it. Now that, in the way I was taught, is scandalous, because you can't go and try and undermine collectivism. But when you think of it, this initiative of Mandela broke a deadlock between the two sides. The apartheid regime was not able to suppress the forces of liberation, but on the other side, and we didn't realize that so well, MK was not able to defeat the SADF and the SAPS. If we think of it, Mandela may have broken the collective, but he had nothing to gain. He wasn't doing it to get kudos as a great thinker and leader. He was just doing what he had an opportunity to do, and did open the way to break the deadlock and to create a new basis for struggle in negotiations. So that's something to realize, that this ran against what we were taught. But Mandela was not afraid of that if he believed he could advance the struggle. I still find it hard to approve of it, but you can't have a blanket ban, and Mandela saw this. And many people still do condemn it. We need to ask ourselves, how does the leadership relate to democracy? Is it really a formalism where you wait for the leaders to be assembled and to give you an okay, something that would have been very difficult in prison? Or do you take an initiative, which, as it turned out, was based on a very clear analysis of the balance of forces? And he had no mandate, but he had an opportunity. Should he have let the opportunity pass by, or was he correct to take it on? He's been vindicated in retrospect, but people were cautious about it at the time. Now, when you go from struggle of a conventional type, including armed struggle, but also just political struggle, negotiations is a very different type of enterprise. And Mandela himself understood that he had to relate to the other side in a way that showed respect for the adversary on the other side. And he set the example of dealing with them on a respectful basis. But the Mandela who could get very angry had not disappeared. As de Klerk found out, he did something treacherous in the early days of CODESA, and Mandela just clapped him. And de Klerk didn't know what hit him. Those of us who had argued with Mandela in the ANC National Executive understood it very well, because he didn't spare the comrades. When he was decided that something needed to be done, you took him on at your own risk, and he would give you a huge clap, metaphorically. But because he was a boxer, it felt like a boxing club. So this was, Mandela was single-minded, but he knew what he was doing and why he was doing it, and that was what guided him. Now, in doing various things, Mandela loomed larger than the organization in many respects. So the imagery around Mandela was very important. Graça Machel says when he came out of jail, he knew exactly what he was doing. And what you can see is that there was the toy at that time, and people who didn't like negotiations consoled themselves in the toy, which had aggressive calls, chants like kill, kill, shoot to kill, and a number of these things. Some of that had already been phased out, But when Mandela did the Toy Toy, he gave this affable, secure invitation to people to join in, and he would be smiling, nothing threatening. Zuma, in his rape trial, for example, came out every day and did the Toy Toy. But the type of Toy Toy he did was, in fact, threatening. The song that he sang, Mshini Wam, was a song that carried a threat that, give me my machine gun. He'd been in a rape trial. A machine gun is a phallic symbol, a symbol of the genitals. And when you shoot it, it's equivalent to ejaculation. So it was a very different message from Zuma, from Mandela. Mandela was very conscious of the need to bear himself and represent himself in a manner that was inclusive and reinforced the peace process. This is why he took so much time to make overtures to the other side. I will leave the first one at that and now pass on to the second one on imagery, which I partly touched on already because they overlap. When Mandela was a young man, it was not like a young man who explores different things. The imagery that surrounded him and surrounded his people was inherited and was part of being a Tembu. It's important to understand being a Tembu was not being an African nationalist, but being a member of a particular tribal or ethnic group. And that was what Mandela learnt as a young boy, but he also took it into his first trial. In 1962, he was already a leader of MK. He was charged, and what he did there is he refused to recognize the court. He was dressed in a Tembu attire. So he was contesting the legitimacy and the legality of the apartheid court by virtue of his Tembu identity that was not embraced in the South African apartheid court. He was not using African nationalism so much as Tembu identity for that. So that it's important for us to think about it. If you are an African nationalist or a South African patriot, does that mean that your other identities just disappear? Mandela understood that they were very strong, that they were strong in his case as well. And it's a very important lesson to us. If we don't just say tribalism is backward, it was also a progressive force in the 19th century, early 20th century, right into the 1960s in this trial of Mandela's. Now that was a case where he came to court after having been underground for 17 months. And the world of underground seems millions of miles away from Tembu identity, but Mandela ensured that they were joined and no one who believed in one or other identity had to forego it. It's important to realize that the 1976 uprising, which came 14 years later, was one where people were not so happy with what had been done from the banning of the ANC until then. And MK was only starting after some early encounters in then Rhodesia, only starting to re-emerge. And in the post-1976 period, that is when people who couldn't fight for various reasons couldn't get out there, or it was too dangerous, were doing the toy. Now, when Mandela came out of prison in 1990, he was remembered as a dignified but angry man. But what is important about Mandela, he always plays the part that is required of him. He had to convince those of us who were not so keen on negotiations, and I was one of those, he had to convince us that we had to secure the peace, that you can't have democracy without peace, without non-violence. And Mandela reached out to Mrs. Verwoerd, the Springbok rugby team, a lot of these things. Some of us were a bit embarrassed with this, but Mandela was right, and it was important to create a condition from which the apartheid regime could not retreat, and that was what he did. But he didn't lose, as I've shown you with today, he didn't lose his anger completely. He didn't lose his aggressiveness towards the apartheid regime. And he didn't lose his Tembu identity. In fact, he was buried at his birthplace. So that what we can learn from Mandela is over this period and other periods of his life, he deployed a number of identities, a number of ways of being. And in doing this, he was showing that you can be more than one thing at the same time. You don't have to abandon something because you've got an LLB, or abandon something because you're an MK soldier or a communist. All of these things belong as part of the struggle for freedom in South Africa. I think I'll leave it there because the two overlapped quite a lot. Thank you very much for joining me. Any comments would be welcome via Creamer Media Policy. Thank you.